During a sweltering summer, a young man named Ha Joyun returned to his homeland after a 5-year absence, having spent that time in a coma. Previously, he had been working as a reporter in Syria, but was severely wounded in a shootout. Despite numerous hardships endured abroad and health issues resulting from his prolonged unconsciousness, upon arriving in his hometown, the protagonist sought out his beloved, with whom he had been involved for 8 years of his life, in addition to the 5 years of his coma. He had missed him dearly, as they had been friends since youth and only began a romantic relationship in their mature years. However, Kang Taejung arrived at the meeting not alone, but with his current partner. This revelation profoundly wounded Joyun's feelings, as he was unprepared for such a turn of events. Despite this, the young group decided to meet personally and discuss everything. Naturally, the brunette wanted to know where his beloved had disappeared to for 5 years, as he had received no news of his whereabouts during that time. He demanded from the protagonist valid reasons for what had happened. Yet, the man was so shocked that his loved one was now in a relationship with someone else that he found himself unable to speak coherently. This infuriated the man, who had been unsuccessfully searching for him all this while. He wanted answers to his questions immediately, but upon hearing the truth, he was not emotionally prepared for it. Nevertheless, he first tried to ascertain the well-being of the injured man. It was only after this that he confessed he had long believed the blonde had perished, as there had been no news of him. Although Taejung was concerned about his former partner, he continued to hold hands with his current one. When it became clear that upon returning to his native country, the protagonist had first gone to meet his beloved instead of his family, the man became even more infuriated, understanding how his family must have felt. However, the young man candidly admitted that he had acted solely out of his longing for his loved one. Now, learning about Taejung's new relationship, he regretted his decision. After the meeting, while the brunette was reflecting on everything that had happened, his new partner, Seo Youngwoo, approached him. He tried to appear courteous, despite his own jealousy, and even acknowledged that the blonde was very attractive. Moreover, although he had previously perceived the main character as selfish and irresponsible due to his sudden disappearance, he now understood that this was not the case. Earlier, the man had openly declared his new relationship, thereby signaling that the long union between him and Joyun was over. He honestly reiterated this to Youngwoo in the evening, obviously to reassure him. Despite the abrupt return of his previously missing lover, Taejung had no intention of breaking up with the man he was now committed to, even though it saddened him, and his partner assured him of a love greater than any other. Meanwhile, Joyun finally met with his family, who had missed him terribly. Nevertheless, the young man felt no true joy, as he was too saddened by the news of his beloved's new relationship. Before departing for Syria, the protagonist spent time with his beloved, attempting to elucidate the reasons he felt compelled to go. Despite the danger, he saw his destiny in capturing significant moments through photography and could not decline the assignment. This decision disconcerted Taejung, who was loath to part with the blonde, even for a short period. Consequently, he tried to dissuade Joyun from the trip by expressing the unbearable hardship of separation. The beloved's reaction greatly surprised the young man, leaving him at a loss for words. Now back home, the protagonist listened to his sister recount how his loved one had missed him and worried during his absence. As the woman confessed how the man had suffered during the fruitless search for the missing reporter, he pondered their conversation shortly before his departure, as if trying to ascertain whether he had made the right decision. The sister believed fervently that the brunette loved Joyun deeply and would rejoice at his return. She was unaware that the young man had already encountered him. Only the protagonist understood the reality, thus refuting her claims about his beloved's feelings, as he remembered that he was now seeing someone else. With tears in his eyes, he tried to convince his sister of this truth, all the while realizing the mistake he had made in the past by going to Syria. It was only later that he admitted that his disappearance had left him utterly alone. The following morning, the blonde arrived at the office of a foreign PR agency's Korean branch, where he had a meeting scheduled. Despite his determination to return to work, he appeared quite unwell, having not yet recovered from his previous ordeal. Nevertheless, he confidently entered the office, which, for some unknown reason, was unexpectedly empty. The protagonist was puzzled by the absence of the employees, but he was more concerned about being late for his meeting with a prominent company journalist. Just then, Shin Kwon-ju appeared behind the blonde with a smile. Noticing the man, the protagonist recalled his sister's words about him. Previously, she had mentioned how the brunette had assisted in searching for the missing reporter. Although Jo-yoon had known this person before his departure, they were not close enough for such a fervent concern over his disappearance. Now he felt it was his duty to thank the journalist for his efforts. That was why he had come to the office. Although several hours late, he decided to calmly engage in conversation with the man. From Kwon-ju, he learned that the journalist had only recently returned to his native country, thus fully understanding the blonde's awkwardness upon returning. During their conversation, it became clear that the brunette disliked unpunctual people, but this time he would not be angry with the young man. After the protagonist's apologies, the two young men talked about the past. More precisely, the journalist conveyed that the reporter had not changed over the years. Ultimately, the young man explained the reason for his office visit. Having heard from his sister about Kwon-ju's help, he decided to express his gratitude. Upon hearing this, the brunette was taken aback, believing it inappropriate to accept such kindness in the given circumstances. His efforts in the search had not been successful. The protagonist felt awkward hearing the refusal, yet he still considered it his duty to honor such a gesture from a relative stranger. It seemed that the man was not particularly pleased with the meeting, responding with a smile only to words about parting with Jo-yoon. Before the reporter left the office, the man decided to inquire about Tae-jung, who had also investigated the disappearance of the blonde. The journalist explained that it was the brunette who had exerted the utmost effort in the attempts to find the young man, and therefore it was he who deserved thanks. Unwittingly, Kwon-ju touched the protagonist's feelings, already fragile from recalling the last painful encounter with his beloved. Nonetheless, the brunette was quite indiscreet in his words and inquiries, even trying to find out if the two men were in a romantic relationship. This forced the protagonist to recall the previous day's conversation with his lover about having another partner. Consequently, the young man began to cry right in front of his interlocutor, apologizing for his overly emotional reaction. Soon, as the two young men were heading towards the office exit, the man mentioned that he would contact Jo-yoon the following week. Surprised, the blonde later learned that he needed to bring previously taken photographs and personally work on them in the office under the brunette's supervision. The journalist explained that given the complexity of the situation, the protagonist could not be dismissed, but the photos needed to be showcased as soon as possible. Therefore, Kwon-ju asked the reporter to be a bit more attentive and to prepare a memory card with the frames taken in Syria for the next meeting. Jo-yoon felt awkward listening to such instructions as they highlighted his current lack of professionalism. Nevertheless, he was delighted at the prospect of returning to work and thus agreed to all the requirements. The man was pleased with the young man's response and continued the conversation. It turned out that their boss had previously been unable to ask for the frames because the reporter had been severely injured. Now he had found a way to obtain them through Kwon-ju. The blonde was embarrassed to hear about the troubles he had caused his employer while he was in a coma. The journalist noticed the protagonist's peculiar emotional state, but concluded it was due to his health condition following the events in Syria. Before parting, he asked Jo-yoon to no longer be late for their personal meetings and then left. Such indifferent words from the man upset the young man, reminding him that he was now alone. At that moment, the reporter realized he did not want to part with his loved one. Shortly thereafter, the protagonist spoke on the phone with his boss, who urged him to recover as quickly as possible to return to his main work. The young man was grateful for the opportunity and thanked him for the care. Soon, the conversation had to end as he was called to a doctor's appointment. During the discussion with the doctor, Jo-yoon hardly listened, as his thoughts were solely focused on the troubles that had occurred in his life. Unexpectedly, the attending physician recognized the blonde as an old friend from their school days. He was delighted by the reunion and thus initiated a conversation about the past. Unfortunately, many of the young man's acquaintances knew Taejong, as the two had always been inseparable. For this reason, the conversation turned to him. Another reminder of the brunette forced the reporter to realize that wherever he went and whoever he met, he would always be asked about his beloved, who was now no longer with him. After finishing his appointment, Jo-yoon called his loved one, hoping to have a more serious discussion about their situation. It seemed he hoped to regain their relationship. While the young man waited for the man to answer the phone, he noticed that the ringtone had not changed. It was still the one that the protagonist himself loved. This thought gave him renewed hope for the revival of their long-lost love. Therefore, during the conversation with Taejong, the blonde persistently requested a meeting. He argued that their separation had been abrupt and nonsensical. The man hesitated before responding, remembering how his current partner reacted painfully to Jo-yoon. Moreover, he recalled that his partner had asked him not to see the formerly missing reporter again. The brunette planned to decline the meeting. The protagonist did not allow this to happen, cutting him off with a declaration that he would wait at a cafe near his beloved's work. Although he tried to explain that he happened to be nearby and therefore wanted to meet today, his words sounded excessively insistent. The young man did not hide his desires, as he no longer wanted to make mistakes in his choices. Unexpectedly, near Taejong's office, his partner noticed the reporter, paused nearby, and tried to eavesdrop on the conversation. He disliked even the thought of the possibility of the two young men meeting, and so he was very nervous. Young-woo remembered his beloved's promise that he would no longer emotionally attach to Jo-yoon. Despite this, he now doubted those words. The protagonist sat late into the night at the establishment, waiting for his beloved, but he never appeared. For a moment, he even thought that he really would not come, but he was mistaken. The man showed up for the meeting and even apologized for being late, explaining that he was delayed by work matters. When the young man wanted to order and talk with his loved one, he noticed his indifferent behavior. The brunette tried not to look at the reporter and declined everything. This greatly upset the protagonist, so he attempted to touch Taejong's hand, but even this was not allowed. With difficulty, Jo-yoon eventually began the main conversation. He tried to express his feelings about their first encounter after a 5-year separation and shared the many questions that now interested him regarding his beloved's new relationship. In truth, the young man did not want and even feared hearing the answers to them, but curiosity prevailed. Therefore, the man told him the story of how he met his partner. Young-woo was a junior colleague at the brunette's workplace and therefore supported him during those times when he unsuccessfully tried to find the main protagonist who had gone missing. Due to profound despair and a lack of hope for the better, the man had suffered greatly over the years, constantly blaming himself for having previously allowed Jo-yoon to go to Syria. When he was particularly emotionally distressed, his partner was the only one who listened and offered help, despite the complexities of the situation. Initially, Taejong resisted acknowledging any feelings for his colleague, trying to ignore him, but soon he made the personal decision to enter into a romantic relationship. Such a detailed account of another's happiness, which shattered the very thing the protagonist cherished deeply, completely shocked him. Consequently, he inquired about what the brunette planned to do next, considering his return. The blonde trembled with fear and emotional pain, bracing himself to hear the decisive response from his loved one. The man, albeit with a somber expression, confessed that he would not leave Young-woo for the reporter. He considered such an action impermissible. Then Jo-yoon dared to ask about the fate of his own feelings and the improperly ended relationship between him and Taejong. For a while, the brunette remained silent, unsure of what to say. Only after a moment of obvious desperation did he attempt to say something, but he was interrupted by a phone call. The ringtone for the incoming call was no longer the one the blonde favored. The man had kept only one of the two tones that his beloved once cherished, thereby crushing the young man's hopes for rekindling their long-lost love. Although the protagonist understood this, he pleaded with his beloved not to answer the call. Soon, Taejung was sitting in his car, trying to comprehend what had transpired earlier at the meeting with the protagonist. He was emotionally burdened, feeling as though he still loved Joyun deeply. Earlier, he had answered the phone because his current partner was calling. During the conversation, he informed him that he was delayed at a meeting with an old acquaintance, but would be home soon. Hearing his beloved describe him as merely an acquaintance deeply hurt the reporter and brought him to tears, as they had been together for more than 8 years. The blonde's condition was dire, as he was suffering greatly and needed support, yet Youngwoo was behaving similarly. Moreover, he implored the man to come home immediately. It seemed that Taejung chose to assist his current partner, for he soon arrived home, much to his delight. Nevertheless, as he embraced the young man, he remembered Joyun's last words. He had begged not to be treated so cruelly, arguing his plea with the intense love that could not swiftly fade. Holding Youngwoo close, the man mentally admitted that not only the blonde needed time to fall out of love and let go. Soon, the protagonist met with a university friend named Song Jinna. He told her about his recent encounter with a journalist. She laughed upon learning that he was late for the meeting with the brunette, especially since he detested tardiness more than anything. Earlier, when his sister recounted what had happened during Joyun's absence, she mentioned the friend who was the first to offer help in searching for the missing man. During the conversation with Jinna, the blonde learned that he might become Kwonju's main adversary due to his own ridiculous tardiness. Nevertheless, he had the opportunity to make amends at their next meeting, and thus he planned to make an effort. Over time, the conversation between the two friends became more measured. They began to discuss the news the reporter had missed during his 5-year absence. The girl spoke about their mutual acquaintances from university, but the protagonist was not particularly attentive, as he once again sank into his thoughts. Soon, Jinna asked her friend to help her find a man and arrange a date. This request surprised him, as the last he knew about her life, she had planned to marry. Unexpectedly, it turned out that the friend had broken up with her longtime partner due to his infidelity. The news horrified the blonde, as the situation in the girl's life somewhat mirrored his own. For this reason, he tried to inquire about how to overcome such an ordeal. However, although Jinna had initiated the end of the relationship, she herself did not know how to cope with what had happened. She suggested that distraction might be necessary in such a situation, but so far she had been unable to achieve this. Listening to this, the blonde grew increasingly gloomy, clearly understanding the challenges that awaited him in the future. It seemed that the friend realized that initiating such a dialogue was a mistake, and she felt awkward. After meeting with his friend, the young man walked down the street, contemplating his next steps. Before parting, Jinna advised the protagonist not to dwell on the person who had left him, as obsessing over it would ultimately torment him. Nevertheless, the reporter could not heed her advice and approached Taejung's house to see him again in person. Previously, the man had promised to reschedule their meeting for another day, as he needed to rush to his partner, but Joyun could no longer wait. Although the young man understood that his behavior was inappropriate and his pursuit of his beloved was overly insistent, he simply could not act otherwise. After sending a notification to the brunette, the protagonist waited for him around the corner. Soon, he saw the man returning home in the company of Youngwoo. Unintentionally, the reporter began to eavesdrop on their conversation at that moment. The two young men happily discussed household matters. At that moment, Joyun realized that he had indeed been acting selfishly his entire life. Meanwhile, his beloved's new partner confessed that lately Taejung had been more affectionate towards him, which delighted him. The man did not notice any change in his behavior, but he promised to do more sweet things to make the young man happy. Unexpectedly, the conversation between the two young men turned to the topic of the protagonist. While Youngwoo explained that he was no longer worried about his return, as the brunette had assured him that he no longer considered the blonde significant to himself, Joyun listened in horror. In response to his partner's reflections, Taejung kissed him right on the street, forcing the reporter to watch. Crying around the corner, the young man recalled how the brunette had once confessed his love to him. Now he was doing the same for another person. The next morning, Kwon-ju was shocked by the terrible state of the protagonist, who came to work all swollen from crying all night. Despite this, they needed to discuss the photographs from Syria, so Jo-yoon, apologizing for his appearance, suggested they get to work. The man was unsure if the young man could concentrate on the task, but he assured him that everything would be fine. Although the protagonist assured that he could fully engage in his work, he was in fact lost in thought during the discussion of the photographs and was not paying attention to the brunette. The journalist was displeased by this and therefore suggested they wrap up their work for the day. The reporter felt awkward due to his repeated shortcomings in front of Kwon-ju, so he tried to rectify the situation. Unexpectedly, he noticed that his interlocutor was wearing a wedding ring. Suddenly, Jo-yoon asked if the brunette despised him. Recalling his friend's words, as well as the journalist's detached demeanor, he could not think otherwise. Nonetheless, the question surprised the man, as he seemed not to harbor any negative feelings towards the protagonist. However, the young man continued to explain that, even without being particularly perceptive, he could still sense any animosity directed at him. After honestly expressing all his thoughts on the matter, the blonde hurried to leave the journalist's company. Before departing, he mentioned that he would show the photographs to his boss and discuss all further plans with him. After listening to everything, the man stopped the reporter with a statement that he was neither angry nor harbored any hatred towards him. Kwon-ju confessed that there was a lot of overtime work in the office at the moment, and therefore none of the staff, including himself, could afford any rest. Thus, the brunette clarified the reasons for his harsh behavior and subsequently apologized if he had inadvertently hurt the young man. Although the man's words did not sound entirely sincere, the blonde was pleased to hear them. Therefore, in the next moment, he agreed to continue the conversation. During the review of the photographs, Kwon-ju confidently stated that the reporter was adept at his job. Most of the frames were clear and conveyed the atmosphere in which people were still living. That is why, even after 5 years, they could still be used. The protagonist was delighted to receive compliments on his work from such a strict yet renowned journalist, knowing how professional he was. For this reason, he unconsciously decided to ask the man a personal question, evidently to obtain useful advice from an intelligent person. With some timidity, Jo-yoon requested help in resolving matters of love, without really expecting an answer. Surprisingly, Kwon-ju took an interest in what he heard and even tried to inquire about the person the reporter was dating. Upon learning some details, he began to explain his point of view. The journalist stated that breaking up is more than normal, especially considering the situation with the young man's disappearance for 5 years. In the brunette's opinion, the only outcome that could occur after such a tragedy was a breakup, as there would never be the same love as before. It seemed that the protagonist understood this, but tried to explain that for him, those years had passed like a single night, and thus his feelings for his beloved remained strong. After listening to the blonde, Kwon-ju explained that for a breakup to occur, both parties must tire of the relationship, but it does not always work out that way. As an example, he cited the relationship between parents and children. Even though adults might expect support from their offspring in the future, it is not always forthcoming. The man's words sounded quite harsh, albeit rational. Ultimately, he advised Jo-yoon that he should offer his beloved a partnership for the night. The protagonist rejected the idea as he was interested in feelings, not merely physical contact with Taejong. Hearing this, the brunette hinted at something personal. Soon, the two young men returned to their work-related conversation. Kwon-ju inquired whether the young man would be returning to his previous position. The reporter shared that he was uncertain, as he was undergoing rehabilitation and dealing with numerous personal issues. Then, the journalist offered him a temporary job in the office with a smile. The position would not require the young man to come in every day, but it would help other employees cope with the abundance of work. Jo-yoon quickly accepted the offer, seeing it as an excellent opportunity to distract himself from his personal life issues, and agreed to start the next official workday. Despite some improvements in his life, upon returning home, the young man cried, still suffering from the end of his relationship with his beloved. After taking his medications, he pondered why there wasn't a pill that could alleviate not only physical but also emotional pain. Meanwhile, Young-woo was drinking in a bar where his friend worked. They discussed Jo-yoon's return to his homeland. The friend was shocked by the news, as he, like Young-woo, had believed the blonde had perished. Reflecting on this, Tae-jung's partner regretted that the protagonist had not actually died. In the past, when the brunette had suffered from the disappearance of his loved one, he had wept openly before his colleague, candidly expressing how much he missed him. Remembering this, Young-woo was particularly angry with the reporter who had caused his loved one and now himself so much pain. The friend understood the complexity of the situation but asked Tae-jung's partner to tell him the whole truth about the past, as only then could everything be resolved in the most honest way. The young man was categorically against this, knowing that if he did so, Tae-jung would leave him. The next morning, the protagonist arrived at work on time. He was met by another employee who was supposed to explain all the details of the work process to him. Surprisingly, all the workers were busily working, creating chaos in the room. The reporter had not noticed this before and asked his colleague about it. With evident fear, the brunette's subordinate explained that if they all did not strive together on the common task, they would let the director down. Despite what he heard, Jo-yoon was glad to be part of the team, as it had already improved his morale. Soon it turned out that the guys were late for a meeting with the journalist, who was now the young man's director. Naturally, the tardiness angered him. Nevertheless, the man tried to contain his emotions since the work was more important. Without much thought, he proceeded with the blonde to the conference room where he was to photograph. On their way there, the young man unexpectedly noticed that Kwon-ju emitted a very pleasant scent. A moment later, the brunette turned to the protagonist and asked him not to look so intently at him, or at least to make it less obvious. The remark confused the blonde, as he had acted unconsciously. Nonetheless, the man did not want to hear any excuses and insisted on his point. After the reporter's apology, the two young men continued on their way. In the conference hall, many news organizations and journalists had gathered as a political figure was speaking. Jo-yoon hurried to his workstation, preparing alongside his colleague for the press conference. The director requested they conduct themselves with utmost professionalism. Amid the crowd of industry workers, the protagonist reflected on life. He believed that injustice should be punished and that his views on the matter should be supported by others. Unexpectedly, Kwon-ju appeared beside him and, by touching the blonde's shoulder as if to give approval, asked him to take a photograph. This gesture from the brunette suddenly made the main character realize that he had been a true egoist, acting solely for his own purposes. He acknowledged that this was wrong and thus decided to let his loved one go, allowing him to live without him. Mentally, he apologized to the brunette for his previous clingy behavior and prepared to dedicate all his time to his work, which he loved no less than Tae-jung. After the press conference concluded, the reporter and the journalist headed to the parking lot to go out for lunch together. Though it was the man's suggestion, the blonde felt awkward being alone with him. Reflecting on this, he once again found himself gazing at the other's face. Kwon-ju was displeased by this, but did not scold him harshly. Instead, he inquired about the blonde's well-being, noticing his frequent pensiveness. Jo-yoon felt uncomfortable but tried to respond honestly that he was undergoing appropriate treatment and was otherwise fine. During their further conversation, the man explained that his inquiry was not out of personal interest but work-related to ensure the reporter's condition did not affect their project. Surprisingly, the young man agreed with the journalist's rather blunt words, even impressing him because he truly did not want to be a burden to others. This response made Kwon-ju realize his own mistake in what he had said, and he quickly justified his words by expressing his care about the organization as its leader. During lunch, the two young men discussed work-related topics. The brunette planned to leave his position at the office to go abroad, as he was not meant to stay long. The protagonist sadly realized that the man would leave for the main branch of their organization in about a year. He hoped to work with the director for a longer time. Despite this, Kwon-ju was pleased with the developments. The blonde then felt awkward about his own emotions and apologized to his interlocutor, explaining that he was not familiar with this field. The brunette did not see the admission as a problem and thus did not accept any undue kindness. Instead, he explained that the main character understood the nuances of photography well enough for it to sustain his life. This praise from the journalist was partly pleasing to the young man, but it also made him feel pitiful. Therefore, the blonde attempted to explain that anyone could take photos. Nevertheless, he also acknowledged that it was the only thing he had been able to do well since returning to his homeland. Hearing this, the man asked why the reporter was so desperately trying to regain a past that he had already lost more than once. Instead of responding, Joyun apologized, realizing that he had inadvertently started a more personal topic again. Kwon-ju explained that there was no need for repeated apologies, as he simply could not understand the protagonist's perspective and thus could not grasp what was happening. Nevertheless, before concluding their conversation, the brunette decided to offer the reporter some personal advice. He mentioned that sometimes it is necessary to look at a situation differently to understand its true nature and to let go. The young man found this information uplifting, and he responded with a smile, inquiring if the journalist was speaking from personal experience. As the two young men were about to leave the establishment, Tae-jung unexpectedly entered with his colleagues. The brunette was as surprised to encounter the protagonist as Joyun himself was. Nonetheless, the young man forced a smile at his former lover who had left him and, moments later, approached to greet him personally. Initially, Joyun asked why the man had not responded to his messages during this time. Although Tae-jung lied, claiming he had been busy with work, Joyun did not believe him. During their further conversation, despite the blonde's courteous smile from the outside, it might have seemed that the former partners were arguing, leading Tae-jung's colleagues to view the interaction with suspicion. Noticing this, the brunette asked the protagonist to stop behaving in such a manner. His words, sounding harsh, managed to even frighten the young man. Tae-jung did not want to hurt someone he still cherished despite everything that had transpired. He tried to apologize for his earlier words, but was unable to do so. The blonde interrupted him with a farewell, finding it too uncomfortable to stay near the man, and after asking for forgiveness, he left. As soon as the protagonist returned to the director, Kwon-ju revealed that he had guessed the brunette's identity. During the search for the young man, he had heard his voice over the phone and remembered it. Although the director did not know all the details of what had transpired between the reporter and Tae-jung, he had immediately guessed that he was Joyun's former lover. Naturally, the journalist was surprised by the protagonist's unconventional orientation, but learned something unusual when he inquired about it. Since the young man had never fallen in love with anyone else, he genuinely had no idea which gender he was actually interested in. Upon hearing this, Kwon-ju tried to explain cautiously that it did not matter to him. However, their organization was quite conservative, so it would be better to keep such matters hidden from others. According to Kwon-ju, the young man's emotions completely betrayed his thoughts, making it impossible for him to lie or pretend. Even during the greeting earlier, in the director's view, Joyun appeared as though he wanted to demonstrate his feelings. While the young man felt awkward hearing this, he believed that this trait was better than constant dishonesty. The man, however, called such conclusions strange. During the drive back to the office, the protagonist apologized for making the journalist respond to personal questions, explaining that he simply had no one else to discuss these matters with. Reflecting on his own life, the blonde asked if things would ever return to how they were in the past and if he could be happy again. This question saddened the man, but he honestly stated that he could not know. Surprisingly, such a simple and detached response managed to calm Joyun's worries. Meanwhile, Tae-jung sat with his colleagues but could not focus on conversing with them, as his thoughts were solely on his beloved. The brunette had numerous questions about the reporter's well-being and the events that had transpired, but he had not dared to ask them while he had the chance. Reflecting on this, Tae-jung realized that he simply had to talk to the young man personally and discuss all the details of what had happened during the 5 years of his absence, as he too could not let go of Joyun. Despite this, Taejong acknowledged that he was avoiding responsibility for the situation, thus postponing the conversation each time.